So what are some healthy strategies that you discovered that fostered growth and healing? We talked a little bit about unhealthy strategies, so let's talk about some healthy ones.
Some healthy strategies, yeah. One of the biggest things that I did in my life that benefited me was therapy, of course. But I think there are different kinds of therapy, and I think the one that helped me the most was the kind of therapy that like rewires your brain a little bit. I had to rewire my brain quite a bit, especially because CPTSD like really just kind of fucks you up, and it gives you these unhealthy coping mechanisms. And so within therapy itself, it kind of shows you like how to recognize when you're doing something. So you can say something, you can do something, somebody's reacting to you, and you're able to recognize that more. And I think that's something that therapy helped me do a lot. And not just only therapy, but my partner did that as well in the last 8 years of our relationship. Like he really did help me through my 20s to kind of recognize some of these bad habits that I had picked up, specifically like social habits, habits in my day-to-day life, like not cleaning things, not cleaning up after myself, being selfish with my time, and within conversations as well. Like I had a big thing where I wouldn't listen to people, I was selfish, and so he kind of helped me pick up on those, and I was able to recognize those more. And because I don't feel like I want to be a bad person, I don't want to send out negative energy into the world, once I started to recognize some of those traits within myself, I started to say, oh, let's not do that again. Let's, redirect, my attention, my social strategies, and I was able to get through a lot more friendships and relationships because of that. And a lot of things I also learned was just putting some of my more negative emotions into my work, my art, my writing, kind of getting these creative things out of my mind and mulling them over in a more physical sense. Very specifically, the flowers in my artwork generally are the mental health issues themselves, like manifested physically in my pieces. And I actually think it's very similar to I always butcher her name, and I'm very sorry. Yaoi Kusama?
She does
the dot? Yeah, the dot
I've heard of her.
Yeah, the dot art. And she actually does have OCD, and so these dots that she puts in her art are a manifestation of her OCD, these like repetitive motions within her art and her mind. And
the
so
work
that's
is beautiful.
Gorgeous. And you can walk in through these places and experience that with her. And so for me, it's sort of the same thing, where I found a coping strategy and mechanism within the repetitive tasks of my artwork, and that can help quell my anxiety, my depression, and it doesn't work all the time. Sometimes creativity is fleeting, but when the creativity is fleeting, like the repetitive tasks involved with my artwork, I can always fall back on those. And so I've been able to find a lot of healthy coping mechanisms and strategies just with my art itself and with my techniques, and just kind of fiddling around. And that's really helped me, especially in my adult life, the last 4 or 5 years, where I've been developing this artistic strategy and this style, this unique style it's very unique to me, because it is my own mental health issues, it is my own story. So yeah,
that's a really cool way of putting it, and I do like that about your work a lot. It's very like multimedia, which is cool. I don't want to say 3D, but very multimedia. It
has like a 3D kind of feel. You want to like touch it.
Yes, I do. I know. Yeah, I do. I literally look at your Instagram because I was like, I want to touch that painting.
Yeah, people at shows will be like nose to nose with it, just like, and they'll be like pointing at it, and they won't touch it because people are nice, but like they just get up really close, and I love it when people get up really close into my art and kind of like try to see stuff. So
yeah, well, just I feel like it makes all the detail that you put into it, you feel like seen and appreciated.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Do you find that you get into like a flow state as well? Like there's a big part of that too?
Yes,
that kind of helps like calm. I don't know, I find that really calms my brain. Like if I'm feeling really anxious, I mean, we all know what unhealthy things you can do.
Oh,
But
yeah.
go for a run, or like do some yoga, or do
Yeah.
something hard that like pushes your body, and I feel like it kind of calms your parasympathetic
Yes,
nervous system.
absolutely.
Have you found that with the
I
artwork as
have.
well?
I have found that with my artwork. Very specifically the gluing of the flowers back on.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I don't do it always in the most healthy way because I use a cement glue that's very fumey.
So you're getting like super high.
Oh yeah, I'm getting very high when I do my art all the time.
I know exactly what glue you're talking about. It smells so good. I'm one of those weird people. I like the smell of gasoline and stuff. It's so bad.
Oh, who doesn't?
Right?
People don't
Apparently,
like
a
the
lot of
smell.
people don't. I could like smell gasoline and glue all day.
Oh,
but I don't. You're like, I do.
I do.
Oh, that's funny.
I eat my marijuana gummy and then I do it some more.
You're like, and then I smell some glue.
But I don't drink alcohol, so I guess.
So that's okay.
Yeah,
it's
kind of
balances.
Yeah,
we all have our vices. How do you feel your family dynamic growing up shaped who you are as an adult today?
There are good and bad things about growing up in an abusive situation. I think, I don't like the term like warrior or like, oh, you're so powerful for getting through that. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, I had to, it was survival. But there's a difference between like the lasting effects of survivalism on like a kid into adulthood and like these healing tropes that we have. And I think that both have affected me. I generally have more patience for people. I generally have, but then at the same time I have less patience for strangers who are doing like very awful things to other people. Like I will fight you if I see you bullying somebody nowadays. Bully the bullies. And I think that in a way it's made me more patient but also angry, and there are this dichotomy of like personality traits that I have that I always have to wrestle with. And I like to think of myself as a very positive, very strategic, very easygoing person, but in a lot of ways I'm really not, because I grew up with parents, with family that were not those things. They were very volatile, they were very aggressive, and growing up with that, it's really hard to shake. And so within my adulthood, very specifically within my 20s, I really had to kind of mold my personality a bit. Like sort of like a sculptor sculpting like a masterpiece, right? Like you start with this marble slab, you have to kind of chip away at it. The parts that you don't want, the parts that you do want, you keep. And so that's kind of how I viewed my personality within my 20s, was trying to chip away at those pieces of myself that I knew I got from my dad and his family that were not healthy, and even the parts of my mother's family that I also inherited with the anxiety and with the perfectionism. I also had to try to get rid of those as well, and to heal fully and to be my most authentic self, I feel. And there are still remnants. I'm still constantly working on myself and my personality and how I adapt to situations and to other people and my relationships with other people. And I'm just constantly learning and growing. And I think we all are. But I'd like to think that in a way, because I was put through that situation and I have healed so much within my 20s, I feel like I am in a much better place to talk about it, to empathize with others, and to kind of put out positivity in the world rather than negativity.
They're more darkness.
Yeah.
It's funny what you say about bullying the bullies.
And very specifically, like, people grow, and it's up to us. Like, nobody can force you to grow if you don't want to, if you're clinging to things. And for a lot of my life I was, but I have a lower tolerance for adult bullies than I do for child bullies.
Of course.
Because children don't know. We're all, underdeveloped brains, and they don't understand the consequences of actions quite yet, and that was definitely me. I didn't understand that I was continuing the cycle of abuse. And I think adults are more aware, and I'd like, you know, if, especially being on the internet, like when there's this just brick wall of socialization in that way, like you are socializing with people, but it's in this just disingenuous way. And because it's so disingenuous, like people can say these horrible, mean things. And
the internet.
The internet. And I grew up, unfortunately, I was a kid that grew up with the internet. And
how old are you again?
I'm 29.
29.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So I grew up in like the era of MySpace, and like Facebook was just getting in there.
Oh yeah.
So we had, you know, email, AOL, like so many new ways to be mean to people.
With the protection of a screen.
Exactly.
A lot of really brave people behind screens these days.
I don't think that I would have been a bully if it wasn't for the invention of the internet.
Wait, so you were mean on the internet?
I was mean on the internet.
Oh,
yeah.
I thought you were a bully in person.
No, we were not mean to this person in person.
It was like internet.
It was.
It's so easy to do that on the internet.
It is, and until you start to recognize these mean traits about yourself, specifically when you kind of lose that like personability with that other person, like I don't think that I would have been a bully if I could see that person's face, if they were crying in front of me, if like I would like to think that I'm more empathetic than that. And so like the way that the internet just kind of destroys personalities a lot of the time, it makes you a more selfish and disingenuous person, and that's something that I've struggled with my personality, especially in my teens and in my 20s. Like, how do you sculpt yourself to be a more personable, positive person when you are, and especially for me, because that's my career field, I'm on the internet as an internet personality at this point. And so it's, how do I take those more positive traits of mine and keep myself from adopting these more negative traits, since it's very difficult, especially with CPTSD, where my first reaction is just to aggress.
Well, you're in survival.
I truly believe that our default is selfish, and we have to work very, very hard on ourselves to be positive figures in life.
But to wake up every morning and decide to A, not lie to yourself, and B, to not lie to other people, even in small ways, I think is a lot more challenging than people are willing to consciously admit. And it takes effort to be really authentic and honest in that way. And I think the folks who say that it is easy to wake up and do that either haven't been through very much in their life, or haven't done a lot of self-reflection, or ironically are lying to themselves and are usually the worst people. So that, I mean, that's just been my experience, but it's just interesting.
You know, like one unhealthy coping mechanism that I think we all have is lying to ourselves.
And that's how you lie to other people.
It helps protect us from the traits that we're less proud of, or the guilt from certain situations. And that's something that I really struggled with, was, you know, stopping the lying to myself, because my family growing up all the time, like they did not talk about their feelings, and even the positive feelings, like we just didn't really talk about things. And so we just kind of pretended that we were fine. And that was one coping mechanism that I just kept, and it's something that I still struggle with, is the pretending that I'm fine. When I'm having tough weeks, to be raw and authentic, like I find that very difficult.
Is it like a fear of those feelings not having space held for them, or what?
You know what? I don't know. It's something that all people from like farming families go through. It's just this thing that like nobody, it's like a tough mentality. You have to be tough to be a rancher. You have to be tough to live in the country. And growing up, like even though I don't live in the country, I'm not a part of that culture necessarily anymore. Like it's just kind of my hometown. I go there to my family's ranch occasionally, and I do actually think that my family is a lot more progressive than a lot of other farming families and ranching families. But there is this mentality of like, if you show vulnerability, if you show weakness, then you're not going to be as good at your profession. People won't take you as seriously. You're going to lose people in your life. And
which is so ironic, because vulnerability is how I've made some of the most amazing connections, and not just romantic relationships, but really deep friendships as well. And if that vulnerability didn't exist on both sides, I feel like you can't, I don't know, if someone's not vulnerable with you, you can't really bond with them, I feel.
Exactly.
Because you don't, there's no like safety. You're kind of just like on guard at all times, and I don't feel like you can really connect in that space.
And it was why I had so many failed relationships in my past, and so many failed friendships, is because I was so scared of vulnerability in that way, and I tried to have this tough persona, and it just didn't work. It generally does not work, and it's why, you know, I do what I do, and I talk so much about, you know, where I come from, the mental health crisis that's plaguing a lot of rural America right now. Like, it's important to talk about that, because
I mean, in America in general, I don't even think it's just rural, but I think it's almost qualitatively a different struggle that rural America has than urban America for different reasons. But definitely a lot of mental health awareness is coming to light. I think it's really good.
I think people love to just stereotype a lot, and you know, they look at rural America, and instead of saying like, this is a group of people who are like really unhealthy mentally, who are very much struggling, and you know, we should care for them in the same way. They just go, well, those are just a bunch of dumb hicks. Which is not true, because I'm one of those dumb hicks. So, you know.
It's good perspective. Good perspective.
What are some key ways that your family dynamic affected your relationships, both romantically and platonically?
And we've spoken a little bit about this, but I would love for you to go into detail about that.
So by the time that I was dating, and when I think of dating, I think of like after high school. I don't really count my high school relationships, honestly.
Oh yeah.
Like,
I'm thinking of my high school boyfriends. I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry, high school boyfriends.
No offense if they are watching this. Love ya.
So many hearts eaten and destroyed.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'd still be friends with both of them. I just had two.
Well, that's one of us.
Like, yeah, I mean, honestly, super great people.
Oh, you're lucky. Okay, cool.
I'm very picky when it comes to relationships. So I mean, I've had like 5 relationships in my whole life, I think, and I'm very picky. But I guess like when I became an adult, one of the big things about my family relationship as an adult is that like I didn't have anything to do with my dad's side of the family, so a lot of their interactions with me and my family was my mom's side.
Got it.
And my mom's side, in contradiction to my dad's side, is very religious, and very like perfectionist, and I think it's rather intimidating, because they're ranchers and they're very well educated. They all have like PhDs, master's degrees, and like very, very well educated people. But they're also harder, rougher, less emotional in a lot of ways, and they're very perfectionist. And so we all love each other. Like I have a very good relationship with my mom's side, but we're always working on that. And so one thing that my partner's always struggled with, and it wasn't until like my, you know, life partner that I found, a lot of them really struggled with my coming to my mom's side of the family, because there was a lot of like nitpicking and like, oh, like what are you doing for your future? Are you getting educated? How much money are you going to be making? And there was
so
a
very
lot
like
of that.
practical stuff.
Yeah. You know, when we
So you would like grill your partners?
Yeah.
That's rough.
So
That's super rough.
and it wasn't until my current partner, because I didn't recognize this. Even though I was at a pretty good place in my life and I was healing, I still had this like incredible urge to like go into my mom's side of the family and be like, oh, look how good I'm doing. Like, look at how well I am adapting. Like all of these things, like look at how talented I am. I'm multi-talented. I would go and I would sing and I would perform. I would dance. I would give free art away. And it was me chasing this validation from them. And sometimes I still struggle with that. There's that, you know, stereotype of the tiger parent.
Yes.
And I'm, you know, stereotype aside, that's kind of what my family was like.
Your mom's like secretly Asian.
You know, I think it's an immigrant thing.
Yeah.
You know, like families of, because my, you know, we're not immigrants now, but we have a lot of like Catholic, like Irish immigrants from my family, like generations back. Like, I think it's just something that, like, when your family were immigrants at some point in the United States, like, there was this, like, you have to do really well, and you have to go out there and study, and be multi-talented, and get straight A's, because that's what we had to do, you know? Like, we were immigrants, and life kind of threw things at us. And so I think there's that mentality, and there's also like the rural America mentality of like, you either, you know, stay in rural America and work on the farm, and there's that like perfectionism there, there's that expectation there, or it's the exact opposite, and they're like, we want you to go out, get straight A's, and like go be an engineer or a doctor. Like, I feel like there's no in between. Like,
so how did you find that this that mentality affected your relationships specifically?
I was judgmental in a lot of relationships. Yeah.
So critical and judgmental.
Yeah, very critical, very judgmental, and
interesting. In the beginning,
yes.
I know you said you've worked on that now,
Yes.
and now you've found a little bit more empathy for people.
Yes. And I was just, I think in a lot of my relationships, I had these very high expectations. Things were supposed to go a very certain way.
I see.
And if they didn't, I would get anxious. I would get really anxious. Like,
was it like the lack of control?
It was.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that makes sense.
I think all anxiety is a bit of that lack of control over things. And you know, very specifically, they would come into my life, and I would, you know, I don't feel like I was aggressive. I feel like I worked very, very hard to not be my dad's side of the family, that I ignored these more, you know, these parts of myself that were also very toxic from my mom's side. Because my dad's side of the family, like, very clearly, like, that was not something that you were supposed to do. Like, those were social things where you're like, no, I don't want to be anything like them. And I think, you know, me and my family, we look at that side of the family and we're like, yeah, those people are not well-behaved individuals. Like, they don't, they're aggressive, they're mean, they're judgmental. But then, like, you don't always recognize on part of your family that you have a good relationship with. Like, hey, you know, we do things too that are not great, not perfect, not great to the relationships in our life.
Got it.
And so I had very high expectations for partners, like romantic and platonic. And even though, like, I have maintained most of my platonic relationships through my 20s, and I even have like a couple friends that I was friends with growing up, that are just lifelong friends.
Cool.
You know, we've all very much struggled with that, and I think we kind of flock to one another, like the broken people. But yeah, I think that, you know, it has affected my relationships, and I look back, and it's sometimes hard to look back because I've been with Brett for 8 years of my life at this point, and we have a very stable relationship. But I look back at the more volatile relationships that I've had, and it's always the same. It's my high expectations and my bad coping mechanisms with just not feeling vulnerable.
So that combination.
Yeah,
I was just gonna ask what the dynamics were in those relationships. So yeah, could you talk a little bit more about that? Like, in the, not about Brett, like Brett sounds wonderful and that sounds like a very stable, healthy thing. But what did you find the dynamic was in the relationships that were not good romantically for you?
Yeah, you know, very specifically, I had a relationship when I was like 20, I think it was 20 going into 21, and he wasn't a bad person. We had very similar traumas, and I think that for the first time in my life, like, we were almost a trauma bond pair rather than we were really romantically inclined with each other. And like, he's doing really well now, and it wasn't like a bad breakup or anything, but like, I think we just kind of recognized by the end that like we didn't necessarily like each other or love each other, that it was this like pair bond that we had, that we were like, well, we cope with things the same way. We don't like talking about our emotions. We don't like talking about our trauma. But at the same time, like, we are desperate to talk about our trauma.
How funny is that?
Yeah.
How the thing that you need when you've gone through something like that, like, I don't know, one thing I've noticed in myself is, I don't want to say like my toxic trait, but like, I would say like I'm an introverted extrovert. Like I love people that I want to be around, right? I'm very extroverted around the people that I want to be around, but I've gotten to the point where I'm very comfortable being by myself as well, and I do kind of need that alone time to recharge. But I'll find that sometimes if I really need that connection or to like reach out to someone, I'm just like, just because they're having a bad day or like I'm just struggling. I think for me, feeling like I'm a burden to someone emotionally, that's been really, really hard for me. Like, and ironically, when I need to reach out the most, my inclination is to withdraw. And it's like, I'll consciously be aware of it, and I'll be like, I know I should just text my friend or be like, hey, let's go grab coffee. I know that sitting and talking to that person, or going on a hike, or going on a run, or like, and grabbing food, like, I know that would make me feel better. But sometimes I think the thought of like having to say to someone like, I just need you to be here for me right now and hold space for me is like physically excruciating. And I've really had to work through that. I'm grateful that I have people in my life right now who have made it abundantly clear that I can always reach out to them, and I'm very grateful for that. But that feeling of like, oh, I don't want to like ask for something is very, very difficult. So I don't know if you've experienced that.
Oh, I still experience that sometimes.
I know it's not healthy. I know it's ridiculous, but it's hard.
I think that sometimes, and very specifically in my earlier relationships, and you know, sometimes in my stable 8-year relationship as well, is that you don't open up and you aren't vulnerable and you let things kind of like get pent up inside yourself, and then you become intolerable of things. You become more impatient, more aggressive as your mental health kind of dwindles. And so I've definitely lashed out at people. And it's because very early in my 20s, I just didn't know how to be vulnerable with enough people, and to let myself have that kind of vulnerability that led to, you know, healing and better mental strategies, and better social stratagem as well, you know, and you know, you can learn coping mechanisms as much as you want just academically, and that's what I did. I was very academic. I'm a very academic person. I like looking stuff up. I like figuring out how things work, but like there's only so much that you can do of that where you're not practicing it in your day-to-day. And I think that really affected my relationships, where I knew what I was supposed to do, but I looked at it more as like, oh, I'm like a psychologist analyzing myself, rather than like, I just need to open up to people, to stop pressuring, you know, changes in people.
That's a big one, not trying to change people. Oh, that's a really good
to
one.
fit my life view, you know, and like it, I don't think I ever had like a really bad relationship, but I definitely struggled with like bonding with those relationships, and I just wanted to pretend like everything was kind of perfect and fine. And it wasn't until my very last relationship where, you know, he kind of forced me to be more vulnerable. He was like, you need to kind of come to terms with some stuff. Like, we're never gonna work if you don't work through your depression, and like some of these things with your family. And he was the one that kind of pushed me to get better strategies with, you know, my perfectionism and my depression, my PTSD. Because at the time when I was dating him at first, I had very bad PTSD, and I still had like numerous triggers, and I would have panic attacks all the time. And the last panic attack that I had was 2 years ago. So so they don't come very often. Which, you know, I still get. I have like, what is it, olfactory, like with scents, like
with
cigarettes,
for example.
So sometimes my brain makes stuff up still.
Interesting.
And
smell wise.
Yeah, it doesn't lead to panic attacks anymore, but that was a big thing that happened with previous relationships where like I had panic attacks because my PTSD would make up smells. Like it would be like, oh, like there's a cigarette smell or a urine smell. There's like all these smells from your childhood, like this, like that you associate with like poverty and abuse. And all of a sudden I would smell those and it would drive me insane because I didn't know if I was smelling them or not.
Oh wow.
Nowadays it's just funny.
Like, that's probably fine, right?
Yeah, and you know what? I don't smell cigarettes anymore. It's just urine now.
Wow.
But it's funny because I just dragged my partner around the house because I was like, I don't know if I'm making up these smells or if our house actually smells this way, but like,
That's so interesting.
if it actually smells this way, I want to clean it.
Yeah.
So can you come around with me and tell me if I'm like, if my brain is making these smells up or if, you know, if everything is fine.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, it's interesting how the brain works.
Yeah, the brain is very interesting. Thanks for sharing that. What are your thoughts on forgiveness? Right? I know.
Yeah,
that's a juicy one.
That's a good one. So I don't believe that anybody deserves forgiveness. I think that you have to work for forgiveness.
Like the other person.
Yes, the aggressor, the abuser. I do not forgive my dad, but I forgive my mom. And here's why. My dad was the aggressor for most of my childhood, whereas my mother was more neglectful than abusive, and so she was more just like there as well. And even though for a lot of my early 20s I didn't have a good relationship with my mom, she has really worked ever since my dad died to be a better person. She got the therapy that she needed. She works every single day to like establish the boundaries and to work to be a better mom for me. Even though I don't necessarily need a mom anymore, it's nice to have somebody that is family at that point, and somebody from my childhood that I can, you know, view in that way. And she's worked very, very hard to be that better person for me. And so at this point, like, I can see the change in her, and I forgive her for the things in my childhood. It doesn't necessarily mean that I can't talk about those things, that I can't, you know, be angry at those things. Occasionally, even, you know, sometimes she'll bring stuff up and I'll be like, hey, you know, I either don't want to talk about that, or do you want to talk about that because it's not going to be nice? And she kind of recognizes that, but at the same time I have forgiven her. I have forgiven most of my mom's side of the family. Actually, you know what? I've forgiven all of my mom's side of the family for most things.
For their
we're still struggling with some aspects of our relationships with each other, but I think for the most part, like, we have good relationships, and I forgive them for a lot of the stuff, you know, that affected me. And the opposite end is my dad, who never took initiative to be a better person. He always made excuses for his bad behavior. He manipulated us, abused us, hit us. You know, he did not do anything within my childhood to deserve forgiveness. And then I will never be able to forgive him because he is dead. Like, when things came to a peak, and he was about to go to jail to serve time for the crimes that he made against children, he committed suicide, and he just never, like, we never got that closure, and so there's no closure to forgive. And I don't believe in, when one of the most important things that my therapist ever told me, and this was when I was, you know, a teenager, and sorry, my hair keeps getting stuck on my earring.
I'll edit that out.
Yeah.
Do your thing.
Yeah. One of the things that my therapist told me that was just very prolific for me, when I went into therapy as an 18-year-old, my dad had died 2 weeks before this, and my grandfather had died like a couple months before my dad died, so I was in a very bad spot. I went in there and I immediately told her, well, I forgive him because he's dead. Like, this is how I heal. I forgive. I grew up in a very Christian Protestant family, and you just forgave. And she looked at me and she said, why? Why do you forgive him? What has he done? And I said, well, he's dead. Like, he can't, he can't defend himself. He can't, do anything else. Like, he made this, like, his life kind of sucks now. Like, he's out of here. And I feel very guilty about that. And she was like, yeah, but you feeling guilty does not dictate whether or not he deserves forgiveness for what he did. And from what I'm seeing and all of this stuff that you have brought up, because anytime I start a new therapy, like, it's literally like, here's a PowerPoint of all the stuff that happened to me that my dad did, and this therapist in particular was very much like, nobody deserves forgiveness. You don't have to forgive. And, in my favorite show of all time, Avatar: The Last Airbender, there's an episode that actually delves into that as well that I actually find just very, very nicely implemented. And it's where one of the main characters, if people on this podcast haven't seen Avatar: The Last Airbender, spoilers for like a 15-year-old show, cool. But Katara and Sokka are two of the main characters, and their mom dies at the very beginning. She's murdered by the opposing side of the Fire Nation. And at the very end of the show, one of the ending episodes is Katara finally facing the person that murdered her mother. And Aang, who is very much like my mom's side of the family, which is very much like, you should be peaceful and forgive people, and that's how you heal. He's very much like, when you face this person, choose forgiveness. And she was like, no. And the other person who was like, you should just kill him, just be aggressive. Like, he killed your mom, you should kill him. And she found this middle boundary within herself, within her life structure, where she was like, I don't forgive him, but I am willing to get past things. Like, I faced him. I can't forgive him for something like that. Like, I feel bad for him. I feel sorry for him. But, like, forgiveness is not on the table for me. Like, he committed an atrocity that I think is unforgivable. And I think in so many aspects of life, victims will forgive their abusers for these arbitrary reasons. And if that helps you, that's amazing. Do it. But I think a lot of the time we are lying to ourselves in saying that helps us, because it doesn't help solve the resentment that we feel, the guilt that we feel, the anger, and the depression. And forgiveness alone is not enough to heal your life. And I think a lot of people think that's what it is, and that it will be this way to get past things, but like, you can't ever get past those things. Like, they're always with you. You're always thinking about them. You can't just, it was 18 years of my life. It's more than half of my life at this point. And those things will always be with me. My childhood will always be a part of me, no matter how hard I want to get past that, no matter how hard I want to forget that. It will always be a part of me.
Yeah. And I feel like it sounds like people interchange guilt and forgiveness too.
Yes.
As I'm thinking about it, just what you're sharing. Like, I feel like people will forgive out of guilt, and it sounds like that's not how you want to actually forgive. That's really interesting that your therapist was like, well, why? It's a very interesting, good question for her to ask.
And nobody had ever talked to me about that before, especially with a religious upbringing, which was very much steeped in, well, we just forgive each other arbitrarily, and I think one of the biggest things that I learned is that abusers will ask for forgiveness from people who want to be nice, who have that guilt, who harbor those, like,
to take advantage of that guilt.
To take advantage of the guilt and to make their abuse seem less bad, because, well, oh, you forgive me, like, I can't be that bad of a person because you forgave me. And I don't know if you've seen this show, BoJack Horseman, but they also delve into that.
It's a cartoon, right? I have seen snippets of it.
It's really good.
It's a good show.
But they also dive into that exact same scenario in a couple episodes.
It's very deep and philosophical.
BoJack
Horseman. Please share any tips or advice for people looking to break generational curses and trauma dysfunction in the legacies that they lead.
Very good
this
question.
Legacy that you are
the legacy.
Yeah.
I would say the best general advice I've ever gotten is to be patient with yourself. We're all growing, we're all changing, and specifically with people who grew up in abusive situations, very specifically childhood abuse, your brain has been wired from the time that you were a kid, and it's very, very difficult as an adult to rewire that. It takes repetition. It takes repetition in building better habits for yourself, and not just in like the day-to-day of building a good habit with doing the dishes and like keeping the house clean. Like, yes, that helps, but it's also building repetition in the way that you interact with people and the way that you interact with yourself. I had to do a lot of self-reflection when I was younger, very specifically because I had a lot of self-hatred, and it wasn't until I was an adult where I got therapy and I had to rewire my brain and how I thought about myself as well, you know, like
so like cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yes, exactly. That
Odie,
is,
stop.
And I think that the best advice that I could give anybody is not only just patience, but like, you know, being tough on yourself as well.
So accountability.
Accountability, not making excuses for your behavior.
That's a really good point to bring up. I think a lot of us do this, but we like to be like, well, I act this way, or I have this pattern or this coping mechanism because XYZ happened to me growing up. And it's like at some point I feel like we all have to grow up and be like, well, we can't change that, but we are accountable for our actions now.
And I still struggle with that. Even as a 29-year-old, even with all that I've done for myself, I'm a much better person than I ever was. But you know, there will be times where my partner has to call me out, like, hey, you're making an excuse for this terrible behavior that you have, your inability to change on something. And when he does that, I try very hard not to be sensitive, but I'm a sensitive person sometimes. And
it's hard when it's your partner too.
Well, you know what? It's less hard when it's my partner, actually, because you know, we love each other and we want each other to succeed, and I see that in him, and he's very, you know, he's never mean about it, you know, and I think some people are just mean, and I'm like, whatever. But I think that, you know, something that I struggle with is taking that accountability and saying, okay, well, how can I structure a change? Like, what is the structure for change here? And one of those things is recognizing your habits. And something that's helped me is, you know, telling my friends and my family, like, hey, when you see me doing something like this, like, you know, like, stop doing that. Like,
bring it to light.
And we don't always recognize the bad habits and the things that we do that are bad coping mechanisms a lot. And it, of course, therapy helps, but you can't be with a therapist 24 hours a day. And
self-awareness can be cultivated too.
Yeah,
it's something that we practice.
So, I think healing can always be practiced and always be, you know, integral to something that you're always working on. And I don't think I'll ever stop working on myself. I don't think that there's ever a point where you stop working on yourself, because there's always traumatic situations. Like, yes, this was 18 years of my childhood, and that is the main thing that I am struggling with, but there are traumatic things in adulthood that can affect you as well. And I think a lot of people who have been through those traumatic incidents in their adult lives too also struggle with some bad coping mechanisms and habits that they are constantly having to shift and change and heal from. And I think that, you know, being patient with yourself and not being mean to yourself while you're trying to heal as well, but also being, you know, you want to have to change. If you're the kind of person that, you know, you don't care who you hurt, you don't care about the other people around you, like, you're not going to change. You have to look around yourself with a sort of awareness to other people's lives and want to break that cycle. And it's sort of like with drug abuse or alcoholism, like, it's sort of the same thing. Like, you have to recognize it within yourself first, and how it affects the people around you. And until you recognize it in yourself and recognize its long-term consequences on your relationships and your mental health, it's not going to happen. That change is not going to happen for you. And
what do they say? Until we suffer enough, we usually don't change.
Yeah.
So you guys, sometimes people have to hit rock bottom, and I think that probably looks different for everyone.
Yeah, and some people never get back from rock bottom, and it's, I think, a lot of the time because they don't have people in their lives that are pushing them. And I've been lucky in my life to have friends and family and a partner that have all pushed me to be a better person. And I think that there's a lot of that. You know, some people find religion, and that's great. I just happen to find, you know, like communities within Denver, like the queer community has been a big one, and my partner and my friends, you know, those structured communal groups that people crave that are going to help you to be a better person and a more consistently better person. And you know, in adulthood very specifically, unlike when we're teenagers, we're less tolerable of people in our lives that are toxic, and we as adults, as we get older, we don't have enough time. So why would we foster a friendship with somebody that's not going to help us and not be good for us? And so I think a lot of people hit that rock bottom where they find themselves alone. And I talk to those people all the time where they say, you know, like, I'm alone, I don't know what to do, like, it feels like I'm on an island on a boat in the middle of the ocean. And I'm like, well, I've been there too, and it sucks, but like, you have to recognize it, that it's not because other people don't have the capacity to get to know you or love you, it's because you are fostering habits within yourself that are pushing people away. Like, I think everybody is lovable. I think everybody can be consistently lovable in so many ways, but we all, you know, trip ourselves occasionally. And you know, it's important to recognize, and it's important not to feel sorry for yourself too at times as well, where, you know, you've done things to a point where, like, it is a lot your fault. But that doesn't mean that it can't change for you. Like, I think that change is always possible.
So growth, self-awareness, empathy.
Exactly.
Those are the themes that I'm hearing. Awesome.
It's specifically self-awareness.
Yeah,
too.
that's a hard one to cultivate. It's painful.
It
to have
is.
to look at yourself sometimes.
I tell people all the time that healing is the hardest thing that you can possibly do to become a better person for yourself, for others. It is the most challenging thing that you will ever do in your entire life, because it's so easy to be mean. It's so easy to be abusive, and that's why we see so many abusers. Because if it were hard to be abusive, people wouldn't do it. It is hard to be a good person and to put light out into the world, and
especially if you've been through a lot.
Exactly. And so that's kind of how the cycle continues, is that you take that easy option out, and it's to be mean and to be bitter and to be, you know, negative, whereas it's a lot harder to go through everything that you've gone through and then to still come out the other side as a positive, optimistic person that can foster growth and change in yourself and others, and to inspire hope. And that's kind of what I would like to be for people, is to say, you know, we've all been at rock bottom, we've all hurt ourselves and we've all hurt others, but there's always room for growth. And there's never a time in your life, no matter how old you get, no matter where you are in life, where you can't look inward and change and become better for yourself and others.
Awesome. All right, well, Kodi Delaney, ladies and gentlemen. So, where can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram with Kodi Delaney Art. That's KODIDELANEY Art. You can also find me on Facebook under the same monogram, and you can go to my website, which is CodiDelaney.com.
And I will include that in a bio as well in the YouTube description.
Great. So. All right. Thank you so much for having me. This has been really fun.
It was my pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you. Woo! Cheers.
Woo!
We did a thing.
We did a thing.